everybody, welcome to another episode of More Than You Can Handle. I'm your host, Jeremy Alder, and my guest today is my hilarious friend, Maddie Wiener.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You've been, Maddie, one of my favorite comedians since you were, I guess, 16 years old when you started. Is that right? 16?
We've known each other for 8 years. That's crazy,
That's crazy, I know.
16, I'm 24 now. That's wild.
Wow, that is, I know.
That's so weird.
I was already
back
old
at
enough
you.
to be your dad when we started together. But yeah, so I've known Maddie since she started in Chapel Hill, and she's gone on to do great things. She was at JFL New Faces in 2021. She's got a great Comedy Central special that you can watch on YouTube. You should definitely check that out. She left our Raleigh scene for Chicago, then New York, and she's currently coming to us from Los Angeles. But you still live in New York, right? That's home base right now?
Yeah, still live in New York. I'm just in LA for some shows, staying with family. But yeah, I'm in Brooklyn right now.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this. I'm really excited to get into it.
Oh, dude, thank you for having me. You know this, but you're one of my favorite comics of all time, and I love you so much. And I'm very excited to do this. It's such a cool theme for a show too. I've been dying to have this exact conversation, so I'm excited.
Oh wow! Okay, well, cool. Well, great. Yeah. Well, I hope people out there share that view and will listen.
You might have a horde of lesbians and queer people descending from. I co-host a gay sex podcast, and they're very attentive, fun podcast listeners. So you might. This might be the beginning of your lesbian fan base developing.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's I love it. Let's jump in. So, did you grow up with any kind of religion or spiritual path in your family?
I was raised Jewish, but that increasingly became more cultural and less religious as I got older. And it always kind of was that. In LA, I went to a religious kindergarten, and they taught us about God. But as soon as I went to public school, it was we would go to temple on Saturdays and stuff, but it was really just ethnically Jewish stuff. My parents were, my mom was maybe a little more she'd probably call herself a humanist, but my parents were both pretty secular people. And I went through a heavy, hardcore atheist phase when I was in middle school that I'm deeply ashamed of.
Did you say you went to elementary school in LA?
We moved from LA when I was 7. So I went to a Jewish school for kindergarten, but then I started kindergarten in North Carolina, and from then on it was public school. Yeah.
Okay.
But so pretty much secular.
Do you know why your parents moved you to public school?
I think it was more that they would have put us in public school in LA, but where we lived was the public schools were just really bad and kind of dangerous. So they were we'll try private school, and then they were it's like sending your kid to college every year. In what world?
Right.
So they moved to North Carolina because they wanted us to be able to go to a good public school.
Cool. So then you came and you went through your atheist phase pretty early for most people.
Yeah.
Middle school.
Dude,
wow.
I remember I got, because this is kind of the generation gap between us is I got Facebook in 4th grade, and I remember my profile picture was Brian the dog from Family Guy, and I would go on back when Facebook had chat discussion boards, I would debate religion with people. It's so cringy, dude. I was 9 years old. I was in 4th grade.
I mean, that's kind of cringy. That's also pretty interesting that someone at your age was interested enough and cared enough about that stuff to actually argue with people about it.
I guess that's the silver lining is I'm okay, misguided, oh, you're Sky Fairy? I'm fuck that. I don't, you know what I mean? That's embarrassing that I was like that, but I was 9, so I'll give myself a break. But
sure, yeah.
Yeah, there is I guess that's a little bit in the vein of comedy to be I guess I've always been hanging out with and having passionate debates with 40-year-old men my whole life. Whether it's a Waffle House parking lot after an open mic or a Facebook.
And here you are on a 40-year-old man's podcast talking about religion. I love it. It's come full circle. Was there an event that or can you pinpoint when you made the atheist turn in middle school?
I think, huh? I know, like I think it was around maybe like sixth grade. It was like between fourth and sixth grade, and I think I just like it. It felt very like, oh, I'm gonna assert my independence, and I'm like, you know what I mean? Like I did believe it, but I was also really into science at the time. Like I wanted to be a physicist when I grew up, which I mean I had no concept of what that actually took, but like, and I think if you're like a kid online and you start watching like a lot of like science videos, that quickly turns into Neil deGrasse Tyson and then Richard Dawkins, and like you kind of get in this whole like very male dominated hyper objectivity like worldview that I you know don't necessarily subscribe to anymore, but like yeah, I think it was kind of like I was really into science, and then that just seemed like an extension of it, of like everything hyper rational, blah 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 blah.
Sure. Did you feel like, were you rebelling against your parents, or were they kind of on that same trajectory?
No, my mom wasn't as much. My dad was, and he's gotten softer about it, I think, in old age, but he was definitely like super atheist. But so I wasn't. No, I don't really feel like I ever had to rebel against them actually, because they were really pretty relaxed, cool parents. So like, I don't know what I was rebelling against. I truly don't. Like, I'm glad I left that phase. I still would describe myself as like under the umbrella of atheism, but it's just like to identify as the thing you don't believe seems like pointless to me. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like I'd rather seek out the thing that I actually do believe. So I don't really know where it came from, except that I'm not sorry, that's like a bad answer, but I don't really know where it came from.
It's interesting, like, but you believed it pretty passionately. Like you wanted to argue with people about it. And so then did that carry through into high school?
I kind of had like an emo phase, and that took over the religion thing, which shows you that it wasn't about religion at all. It was just about like, who am I? And I'm like different.
Well, sure. Yeah.
I will say the one thing that I like that maybe isn't cringe about it, that I'm like, oh, where was the rebellion coming from, is that it was this thing that I heard other people say, and to me at the time I was like, I don't believe that. And it was like being able to be like, I think you're wrong, felt like a big thing for me as a kid, to be able to be like, my opinion can be in the ring with these adults. You know what I mean? Like if an adult says something and I disagree with it, I have a right to my own thoughts. I think that's what I was discovering more, and it just kind of came out in that way.
So high school, you go emo, and you're just not really interested in debating these questions anymore. Is more into
that
like,
kind of fell away. I had like a little bit of like a Jewish identity phase, but it was always more like cultural than anything else. And I mean, I would still identify as like culturally Jewish, but yeah, it kind of just became less important to me. And I was also like, I think I also reached a point where I was like, oh, religion like can also do a lot of really good things for people, and I'm not like, I don't. It just didn't. It wasn't something that I was like angry about anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, I just want to stress so much. I was 9 years old. Like it really was not like a fully baked worldview.
Totally, no, right.
But it faded into like I became like a really big like theater kid and listened to a lot of like My Chemical Romance and like hung out in the art building, and that became my like sort of high school religion. And then stand up started not long after that.
Do you remember like what was motivating you to get into stand-up? Was part of it that desire to like throw your ideas into the ring again and like feel that freedom to speak your thoughts?
Yeah, I think initially it was just like, oh, what's like a fun thing to do after school? And then I met our friends Kenyon and Sam at my first open mic, and they were kind of like, no, there's this whole scene, you come out every night, it's this thing. And then once I got sucked into the ritual of it, I was like, oh, now I'm like really gonna. But yeah, I think that's like what, when I was like young, and I guess still now, it was like appealing to me, was like, oh, you get to make this like bold declaration of like how you see the world. I don't know that I ever would have articulated that explicitly, but I think that is what like, I think I was like raised in a household where that was like valued. Like it wasn't like a kids should be seen, not heard. It was very like speak your mind, challenge things, think for yourself was like a value that our parents really, really pushed on us. And it's like, that's so in the stand-up ethos, I think.
Yeah.
Is like that you're encouraged to do that.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Right. So when you decided to do stand-up, your parents were on board with it?
Yeah. Yeah, they're like the most supportive, coolest parents of all time. I'm like, my mom, I'm sure you remember that my mom was like driving me to open mics and like is just the coolest. But I will say also, it wasn't like I was like, 25 and I was like, here's my career. They only had to support their child's hobby. So that was a little easier, you know what I mean? And then by the time I was like, now I'm 24 and they're like, okay, no, but they've always been super cool about it. And like, didn't mind me saying like dirty jokes or cursing or like running jokes at the dinner table. Like they're really like nothing's taboo or off limits, which is like so cool.
Yeah, it really is. And rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like really lucky that I like lucked out in the parent department so hard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And to me, I mean, that speaks of that's a type of spirituality that they brought to your family, of like open inquiry and exploration and self-expression. And it seems really healthy.
Totally. And I don't think I saw it as spiritual until now as an adult, looking back on it, that I'm like, oh yeah, there was like our family dinner table was always like, when I was a kid, we had dinner together every single night, and it always escalated into these like weird philosophical debates and talking you over each other and like riffing, and like it was funny and it was interesting, and it was this like really important sort of like ritual and tradition for us. And like maybe we didn't have like religious traditions as people would think of it, but it was this like gathering and this like joyful thing, and it was like hanging at a table of comics. Like I think it really prepared me, especially as like a woman, or like, non-binary, but like living whatever as a woman. It's like to be like talk over people and don't let people interrupt you, and like like throw your ideas in the ring is the perfect way to put it. Like I never thought about that as like spiritual or religious, but I think that's what kind of took the place of that for us, since it was such a secular household.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I remember initially seeing you at early open mics and just being impressed at how bold you were as a 16-year-old, and strongly opinionated. And I mean, I remember you initially being fairly political. You still are in some of your stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure. Which, I mean, God, a political 16-year-old comedian. I'm like, burn the fucking tapes, dude. That's
but it
horrible.
was good. That's the thing. Most of it's bad, but actually, I think I remember one of your first jokes being something like, I don't get why people are so scared of black widows in North Carolina. They're just seeking justice for their sons and husbands.
Which I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that now. I think at the time I thought that 16, was like, but I thought that was like, oh, calling out this issue and sticking truth. And now I'm like, no. It's like, that was like me benefit. Like I look at that now and I'm like, shut the fuck up, Maddie.
No judgment. Right. Sure. Of course. I would hope you would look differently on whatever you said when you were 16, but
I was trying to touch on something political. I guess there's that. And I was trying to be on the right side. I don't think I did it respectfully or correctly, but I was trying for it and failing.
Yes, you were. And it was smart, and it was the people in the room thought it was funny. Except for me, I thought it was problematic at the time, but I wanted to let you evolve as a person so you could recognize it as problematic, which you do now. So I'm really proud of you for getting there.
Thanks.
I'm kidding, dude.
Oh. Oh my God, I was fully like, wow.
Okay.
Jeremy's holding, I don't know if you guys can see this. We're actually filming this in the same room, and Jeremy has a loaded gun under the table pointed at my stomach. No, that is not yeah, but I mean, that's, I guess that's the downside of starting comedy at 16, is you're gonna take some big swings that are not
dude, that's the
probably
downside
totally
of starting
cool.
comedy at all, at whatever. So high school, then college, like where do you see yourself now spiritually and religiously?
I think I think I had to overcome like a lot of sort of like internalized stigma that spirituality was like stupid or weak or wishy-washy because it wasn't like quantifiable and data driven and like blah blah blah. And I think now I'm like, oh, there is like a spirituality but for me it's just like being deeply connected with being alive and like nature. And like the most spiritual feeling I feel is like looking up at the stars and feeling like part of this big thing and feeling lucky to be here and feeling how insane it is to exist at all. Yeah. And being like, oh, it could have been nothing and instead it's this. That fact and like feeling that is spiritual to me. And like and other people and love, like that's what I believe in and think is like sacred and like worth living for. And that's what to me feels more than just emotional. It feels like I feel like alive and lit up by it.
It feels does something feel true about it?
Yeah, it feels like universal, and it feels like clearing away everything else and excavating to this like this center and this core of where everything stems from. You know what I mean? Like it feels calm and true. It's like nature, other people, being like feeling like you're not resisting being part of this ecosystem in this cycle of everything and leaning into like being a little piece of it. That would be where my head's at now, I think.
How did you get there?
That's an interesting question. I think, I don't know. Maybe just growing up and getting older and becoming my own person, because I think those are things that I sought out a lot of it was comedy, like, and meeting comedians and like comedian friends of mine who would like, you know, tell me about like writers that they, oh my God. Oh, actually, this is a perfect example of this. Our friend JD Etheridge, incredible comic. He I remember one time outside of like one of my first open mics in Greensboro, he goes, here's what you got to do. Here's everyone you got to like study to become a comic. And he gave me a list that was like some of the greats. It was like, you know, Patrice O'Neill, all these comics. But then it was also like Aristotle, The Art of War. Like it was like all these like just any grand reaching philosophical like great assertion at the universe. And I think that feeling of like, there's a quote from I think Ralph Waldo Emerson, something to the effect of like, assemble your own Bible and collect words that when you read them appeared to you like the sound of a trumpet.
Yeah. And
that's, I think, what comedy has taught me, is to like go through life and collect those things and like, yeah, it's like building your own Bible and building your worldview and finding like writers and thinkers that like speak to you. So I think that was actually probably the most, I've never actually thought about that before, but that probably is where that kind of started, is like, and stand-ups have such a like legend and lore around like the people they seek guidance from, I think. I don't know. Do you feel that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there is this kind of reverence for the comedians that went before, who are willing to bestow their wisdom and knowledge on those of us starting out. Yeah, is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I don't think I really had a lot like that before comedy, where it was like, oh, these stories of people before you and the practice of like continuing a lineage or a tradition.
Yeah, right.
Like I feel like that's one of the coolest things. Like you could be driving to a gig 5 hours away in the middle of the woods and it sucks and you're making no money, but that there's the thing in the back of your head that's like, but all these greats like suffered and did this, and that almost feels like a religious practice, is like justifying suffering in the pursuit of like this time-honored tradition. Ooh. It's like that seeks to achieve this abstract like connection with people. Like that feels like very religious to me. Basically, we're Jesus Christ on the cross is what I'm saying. Is when I lived off Waffle House for 3 years in a row because I was doing road gigs. It's not unlike the nails in his hands.
That's right. We did it for you. We did it for the world, to save the world. That's beautiful. Yeah.
But I think there is something true about like, well, I don't know, because you have much more of a religious background than I do, but from my like sort of outside understanding, it does seem like comedy is another similar tool to make sense of the suffering that happens in life and sort of metabolize it into something good or worthwhile. Like I remember Steve Brady, he said to me and like some other young comics one time, he was like, remember, there's no bad experiences when you're a comic. The worst thing in the world can happen to you and you turn it into a bit. But it is this like framework for life where you go, nothing bad can happen. It's all for a greater purpose. I mean, that's like what people get from God, right? I'm some of the stuff I'm saying probably sounds cringy, but I'm trying to lean into it because
does not at all.
I think there's truth to it.
This is exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I've had some
I think a lot of comedians start from a place of suffering, like tragedy happens, they lose a family member or they go through a divorce, and then they go
minor sexual
comedy.
assault over here. Yeah, it all.
Oh, geez, see? Yeah.
I didn't piece that together, and then I was like, oh, and then a month later I started stand up. Who would have thunk? But yeah, I think that's Sorry, not to make it heavy. I'm fine now, but I completely agree with you. Yeah.
This is the meat. This is what I want to try and get at with this podcast, because my gut tells me there's something there, that what we are doing can be a type of spiritual practice.
Yeah.
It's also utterly ridiculous and trivial and stupid, but
to me that's beautiful, and that's the safety net of it, is that like I think this is a bold claim, but I think religions take themselves very seriously, and that's how you get dogmatic practices and abuse and this unquestionable thing. But comedy is this beautiful balance of both, where it is sacred and the most important thing in the world to me, and also it's stupid and it doesn't matter. Like if you can laugh in the face of it, I think you sort of maybe neuter it from becoming super dangerous. I mean, I don't know, there's also obviously very hateful comedy and there's a lot of abuse in it, so it's not bulletproof. But
in terms of like producing sexual predators, I feel like comedy scene has rivaled the church at times.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess my metaphor really falls apart there. I'm like, but the priest didn't have any good bits about it. Okay, I take it. Maybe there are some bad experiences when you're sorry, I should have amended it. There's no bad experiences when you're a male comic.
Oh, shit. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
No, we definitely have.
I second that.
I guess we do kind of have that weird sort of dogma about it, like the church, where there is this thing of like people will defend sexual predators based on the merit of how good they are at comedy. It's interesting right now, too, because I feel like there is like a wave of sort of like alt-right comedy in the face of comedy being very like anti-woke, whatever. And it's these people who espouse supposedly this idea of question everything and nothing is sacred until you question what they're doing and their power structures, and until you question Joe Rogan, and until you question like maybe offensive jokes can actually cause harm and hurt people. Then question everything is not so much on the table anymore.
Right. Everybody's got their limits and their boundaries and their faith commitments that can't be questioned.
Is it okay for me to ask you questions? Does that mess up the format?
No.
Or do you want to keep comedy for you as a spiritual practice? If you feel that it is that, has it supplanted any of your more traditional religious practices at all, or did they kind of exist side by side? Like, has it taken the place of your singular religious practice or spiritual practice?
I used to be a preacher before I started stand-up, and I don't preach anymore. And so doing stand-up is maybe an obvious replacement of the preaching function. But I see them as very different types of practices, but, from the outside, they look very similar. You're getting on stage in front of people and talking. To me, though, it's been the kind of like practice of like introspection and like kind of digging into myself and learning how to be more present and vulnerable to people in my comedy. That feels like that's part of my journey as a person into becoming more fully myself. And so I see it as a kind of spiritual practice, just the writing process itself, and like learning how to like observe things. And this gets to what you said about there being no bad experiences, like learning how to observe life without passing judgment immediately about whether it's good or bad, and seeing it as like potential material to be shaped into, something that I can then share.
There's something really interesting too about the preacher stand-up comedian thing, where I think about like Cat Williams, like watching him, and it's like, I don't know if he said this explicitly or if I just heard other people say it, but there is like, I think there's a lot of comedians who get like a cadence and a stage presence from the way that like preachers speak to a congregation, because you are like taking a room of people and bringing them on this like journey. Like, is your stage presence as a comedian similar to what your presence was like as a preacher?
It is, which is kind of anti the charismatic preacher razzle dazzle, because growing up that always struck me as untrustworthy and gross. And
you weren't the pastor coming up to the kids like, who else is among us? Lord Jesus.
Yeah, no, I did not like the kinds of preaching you see on television. Yeah, so I feel like my stage presence is very similar in that it's fairly relaxed and subdued. That was the same way that I preached. So it definitely feels like there's a continuation there for me. It's just in stand-up, I'm really only accountable to myself and the laughter. Whereas in preaching, I'm accountable to the larger, authorities, whether that be the scriptures or the church, God. With stand-up, I just don't have any of that to worry about. I can just talk about whatever I want. And because comedy just doesn't matter, the stakes don't feel very high. When you bomb in front of a congregation and you potentially lead people to despair, as I've done many times in stand-up at many bars across the Southeast, it's just very different. It's just very different. It feels like it matters more. So
I wonder if that's made you a better comic, because comedy feels low stakes by comparison. Because like I've always felt like whenever if it's some like, not that I've done that many, but the few that I have of like a taping or something or a big thing, it never goes well if it's the highest stakes thing I've ever done, because I'm too nervous. But if it's 2 or 3 rungs below that and I'm like, I've done harder, this is whatever, that's when you're like, this is good. And I wonder if the fact that you're like, yeah, I'm not performing for God, like I'm performing for you idiots. Like I wonder if that makes you better.
Interesting. Because I put a lot of pressure on myself when I was a preacher, a lot more, to like get it right, whatever that meant. Yeah, I just don't with stand-up, because I just don't think it really matters. Which is ironic, because I think I went into stand-up because I wanted to continue to do something that I thought mattered. And I thought, well, comedy is a way to maybe like not just connect with people, but like, shape people's ideas about the world. And I don't think comedy has that ability, really.
It's impossible for me to think about doing comedy with that in mind. But I will say that like as a kid, my worldview, especially I think in the absence of religion, was shaped very heavily by like comedians that I watched. Like I'm not trying to take a stance on this by saying his name now, but like at the time, Louis C.K. like influenced me so profoundly as a person before I even wanted to do comedy. Like his thing about on Conan, where he's talking about turning off your phone and like sitting with your own thoughts and feelings and letting the sadness hit you like a truck, that changed my life as like a middle schooler or high schooler, because it taught me to like become acquainted with my own emotions in a very profound and intimate way that I don't think I would have found if I hadn't been exposed to that bit. And I do think there's something too about like, you could read an academic article or watch a TED talk about the importance of like sitting with your thoughts and blah blah blah, but when it makes you belly laugh, it's like that thought is in your bones. Like when a bit is like so in your bones that you think about it other times when it comes up in your life, that's how you like really don't forget stuff. And so in some ways I do think comedy is just stupid and just should be funny, but I also would be lying if I said I hadn't had those moments where I'm like, oh, it changed me as a person, and it was because it was funny and true at the same time.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I've had those experiences too. I might not be giving comedy the.
I'm not saying about my. I mostly do cum jokes and like I'm gay now jokes. Like I'm doing.
Not true. You have some very profound bits.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, for sure.
But I think it's few and far between the comics who do the like what we've probably gotten from those few greats who are like.
Yeah, that's really hard.
But then there's also like you watch Dave Attell and it's just funny.
Yeah.
And there's something kind of beautiful about that too, and almost spiritual, just because it's pure joy and you don't have to overthink it.
It's a very communal experience, which is really great. And I do think
that is
huge. There's something spiritual about that. Yeah.
The fact that it happens as a live show, and the fact that it's like, I think especially like for anyone, but like I can only speak to like my generation, is like I grew up as like a very online kid, like spending most of the summer like watching YouTube videos and on Tumblr and all this stuff, and like to have a thing that has to happen in the room and that you can't, it's not music, you can't play it alone, like you have to have other people there for it to work, and you have to all be tuned into this thing, is like special.
I agree, and I feel like it also, like as a comedian, it's brought me into contact and into relationship with people that I probably never would have been otherwise. And
1,000%.
Comedy community is one of the most racially, socioeconomically, gender diverse communities I've ever been a part of, which isn't saying much because I grew up in rural Texas, so there's not a lot of diversity, but relatively speaking, yeah.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way.
There aren't that many communities out there that bring real diversity together. And ideally, it's diversity brought together by people wanting to tell the hilarious truth about themselves and the world.
Our friend Kenyon said something to me that I think about all the time, is he said, he was like, comedy is the first place where I've been rewarded for being more myself, not less myself.
Wow.
And I think that's why it's like so incredible that comedy is so diverse and that people's styles are so different, because it's really like about you leaning into how your brain works and how you see things. And that's like a pretty radical thing. I'm like, what else in like, what other job can you have that's like that? It's like, that's pretty fucking cool. Sorry, I don't know if we can curse.
Dad will allow it.
I think there's like a community to religion that I think growing up in a secular household I didn't have. And now I really feel like the strongest sense of community I could have ever imagined. And like my best friends in the whole world. I mean, aside from like my immediate family, I'm like, this is my family. Like, you know that you could go anywhere in the country and you'll know someone or know someone who knows someone that will feed you and let you sleep at their house for the night. It's like, it's like okay, now I'm really going to sound pretentious, but it's like an antidote to capitalism a little bit. It's like a way of living outside of, it's not outside of that. I mean, you sell your soul and you monetize that, but you get your time back. But I joke about like, oh, I keep dating comics, but it's also like, every time I've ever fallen deeply in love has been because of people I've met who shared a passion for this thing. Like, it's the best thing in the world. It's the comedy. It's the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
I love it so much. I mean, I've had friends, like I've seen people's lives be saved because they had this community that I think the community was the thing that keeps people up sometimes. For all of its faults, like it's a fucking great community.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. Good stuff, Maddie.
Dude, it makes me want to cry. It makes me so happy. Like, I'm like, what a lottery ticket life. To do comedy, that's crazy.
Yeah. It really
That's
is.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it's really, I mean, it's kind of like what we were talking about too, the spirituality of like, what a lucky thing to even be alive. What a
Sure.
lucky thing to even be alive. And then on top of that, to get to like have fun every day, that's bonkers.
Yeah.
That's just batshit
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like, life rocks. I think I'm being extra positive because I'm thinking about it now in the light of like this beautiful
Yeah.
divine practice. And it's like, okay, yeah,
No,
sometimes
but
it sucks.
actually, I love that. 'Cause that's beautiful because a lot of times I feel like you ask most comics, how comedy's going, and we tend to focus on the negative, at least with each other. They'd be like, dude, God, it sucks. It's like being in an abusive relationship. Like, it just sucks so bad. It's just all, it's so hard and painful and whatever. But it's really not. It's really mostly joyful and
Yeah.
fun. And we are lucky to get to do it. And to the idea of actually making a living doing comedy is, you see why people put up with a lot of shit just for the possibility of that,
Yeah.
So this might feel like a hard turn, but do you think about death?
Here's my one thought on death is that the only thing I know is that I don't want to be buried in a casket. I don't want to be cremated. It's like really important for me that I get to like become worm food and be reabsorbed back into the system. Because to me, then there's nothing scary about like I'm gonna die, quote unquote, but the whole thing is fine without me. It's like you're borrowing the atoms that make up your body. They've done a million other things. It was cool for a minute, but it's like, how dare you not return that back into the system and let it get recycled and become a tree that becomes food that somebody else eats? Like, if that's what's going to happen to me when I die, then like, it's fine. Things will keep going on. So I just know I want to be buried in a way that I can go back into the system. I mean, death terrifies me, but like, I think that I quote unquote, like me, like I think of me, I think is gone. I think when the meat machine breaks down, I've probably had my run. Mm-hmm. But I think in like a kind of beautiful way, it's like nothing's really created or destroyed. It gets recycled and it's something else. And if you don't think of yourself as separate from the rest of the universe, but just this like part of it, like if you take the ego out of it, nothing's really going away. It's just changing. I mean, I don't feel that. I'm like, no, I don't want to fucking die. I want to do stuff. But like, if I think about it, I'm like, I think that's probably the way I want to look at it.
Is it something that you think about a lot, or is it something you avoid thinking about?
More so recently, like after graduating college, I think because I've just had this feeling of like, oh, I'm an adult and I can really shape my life into whatever I want it to be. And I like am prone to really bad like anxiety and OCD and depression, and I know that I could let that suck me in, and 30 years down the line I could go, damn, I wasted my life. And I don't think I'm leaning that way, but I think a lot about when I'm on my deathbed, how do I want to feel looking back at my life? And I think I'm trying to make myself make decisions with in the back of my head, you're going to die someday, what are you going to wish you did? There's a great quote. So, I forget who said it, but I heard it on Joe Zimmerman's podcast. It was something to the effect of live your life as if you already lived it once and made the mistakes you're about to make, and now you're getting to go back and do it again. So I mostly think about death as like when it's over, it's fucking over. So like,
sure.
Do it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a healthy way. I think it's healthy to think about death. Because it helps you focus on life and really think carefully about what you're doing with your life. I don't think it's necessarily morbid at all. And I think so much in our culture tries to hide the fact of death and encourages us not to think about it and to avoid it. And who's benefiting from that? Somebody is. It's not us.
Yeah, the economy only matters if you like think you're gonna live forever.
Yeah.
If you like know the number of days you have left, you're like, fuck my job.
Right? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have
Fuck
like
what
a
kind of
real
car I
awareness that,
drive.
yeah, if you have a real awareness that life is fleeting and you are going to die,
Yeah.
like that,
It all falls apart.
yeah,
The economy falls apart.
yeah.
Yeah. So how do you want to be remembered, Maddie?
I don't know. I don't, there's something cool about maybe the idea of, you know, with comedy, like your work may be living past you, and that's cool, but I'm not like, I'm trying to immortalize myself in the, you know, it's all gonna go away. So I hope the people that how strangers remember me, if they remember me, I feel like is kind of almost none of my business, but I hope that people that I like love feel happy when they think about me. Yeah, that's what I'll shoot for.
That's how I'll remember you, Maddie.
Oh, thank you. And then you fire the gun under the table. I hope to not be remembered for the comedy I did at 16. That's what I'll say. I hope.
This has been great. Thank you. Some things have already shifted in my brain as I think about this stuff with you. So thank you for.
I loved this conversation so much.
Before we go, how can people find you and learn more about your comedy and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'm at Maddie T. Wiener on Instagram. I'm also on YouTube. I just taped a set for Don't Tell, that might be out by the time this podcast episode comes out. So if it does, feel free to check that out. And I have a mailing list and a text list everything's in the link in my Instagram bio. But if you want to put in your email, I'll just let you know if I'm performing in your city. Yeah.
Your newsletter is great, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I also have a Substack, which is like not necessarily super comedy-ish, but it's sort of just like trying to be like cathartic essay writing. Yeah, my Substack is
it's very
something else to check out.
Profound stuff, and I think someone who enjoyed this conversation would probably enjoy a lot of the stuff that you write.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I know that when you sent me the email for the show, I know you said, is there anything that like a practice that you have right now or any book or anything? I do have something. Yes. Can I share it?
Oh, please. Yes.
Okay. I have it here. I read this recently. It's from, Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on self-reliance, which I haven't read the whole essay. I really have no idea what it's about, but this one paragraph I think about all the time since I read it. It's like kind of a long paragraph. Is that okay?
Please take your time.
Okay. It says, familiar as the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set at not books and traditions and spoke not what men, but what they thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his own thought, because it is his. In every work of genius we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. That really, really, really stuck with me.
I think that's a great thing to end on.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was really, really cool.